In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Would you please be seated? Last week, we pondered what it is to speak of Emmanuel, not only as God with us, but equally as God for us, and indeed God for them. We considered what it is for the God with us and for us to ever be the God who enfolds and incorporates the proverbial other, being, as he is, as much for them as he is for us. We noted, too, how the story of God's relationship with his people has always had the other in mind, with his election of the people of Israel being a matter not of exclusion, but of vocation, that the definition children of Abraham may indeed extend to the ends of the earth. Since then, we have seen this profound incorporation of the other in full display at our Christmas services. For those of you who were there, think back to the Christmas pageant on Christmas Eve. What a ragtag, unlikely and bizarre host of characters that features. Abraham and Sarai were nomadic pagans from a far-off land. Moses was, to all intents and purposes, an Egyptian and the adopted son of the Pharaoh who enslaved the people of God. David, a peasant shepherd boy. The prophets, troublemakers to the authorities and nuisances to the people. Famous though these central figures in God's story be to us, let's not forget the deep otherness with which they were viewed by their contemporaries. This image of the God who so adopts and works through the other is seen again at the manger, when the first people called to meet God incarnate are a group of shepherds. Far from the sentimentalized, bucolic picture we might find on a Hobby Lobby postcard, the shepherds of Jesus' time were viewed at best as social outcasts, and at worst as unreliable, unsafe, certainly unsavory characters, kept firmly on the margins. And yet, it is these to whom the announcement is first made, that the salvation of God has come, these whose presence is requested at the side of the Word made flesh. From the get-go, the other is brought intimately into the narrative of the incarnation. To speak of Emmanuel as God for them as much as God for us is an integral part of the Christmas story. And today, our readings take that incorporation of the proverbial other yet further. Today's gospel reading, if you look back to the very first verse, begins with the Magi, these wise men from the east who visited the Christ child and announced his birth to Herod. Now, we'll hear more about them at Epiphany on the 6th of January, but in the meanwhile, let's just note a couple of things about these strange visitors. First, that term, Magi, is a weird one, but probably our best label for them. Better than wise men, and certainly better than kings. The word Magi it literally means magicians or sorcerers. These were pagan astrologers, pagan shamans, who studied the stars to discern the will of their gods. These are a far cry from the rabbis and priests of Israel. Second, both tradition and kind of good geographical estimates identify these guests from the east as Persians, or to use their older name, Babylonians. In every way, the Magi are the antithesis of who one would expect to be called to greet and adore the Jewish Messiah. Pagan polytheistic magicians who come representing Babylon, one of the great historic enemies of Israel, that vicious conquering nation who destroyed the temple and exiled the people. And yet, like the shepherds before them, it is these others whom God places at the vanguard of his new community. These others who stand alongside Mary and Joseph as the first worshippers called to Jesus Christ. This is bizarre. Let's not lose sight of the scandal of the nativity scene. So, holding on to this in the back of our minds for a minute, let's just move on a little bit through the gospel reading. We see the Magi depart the Holy Family, and an angel appear to Joseph in a dream. And look at what he commands him. Rise, take the child and his mother, and flee into Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. As we read on, we hear that Joseph obeys that command of the Lord and indeed does take the family into Egypt. Now, this entire scene is contained within, 2 sentences, and is easily glossed over, especially given that just a couple of verses later, we're suddenly dealing with John the Baptist and an adult Jesus, and it's 30 years in the future. But to do that, to gloss over those passing verses from the infancy narrative, misses something really important. Let's take a step back for a moment and consider what it is that the Lord is really asking of Joseph here. Rise, take the child and his mother and go into Egypt. What is Egypt in the Jewish imagination? It's the ancient enemy, the classic bad guy, the archetypal symbol of oppression and enslavement. Perhaps more than anything else, the story of the Exodus and everything associated with it, the Passover, the law given at Sinai, the 40 years in the wilderness, the entry into the promised land, all of this lies at the heart of Israel's self-identity and understanding of themselves as a people in relation to God. And in this narrative, deeply woven into the fabric of the Jewish culture and faith, Egypt is the antagonist par excellence. The movement of the people of Israel out of Egypt, away from the place of slavery, rescued from the oppression of the Pharaoh, brought into that covenantal relationship with God, which could only come about because they'd been delivered from Egypt, is arguably the central, undergirding narrative by which the people of God understood who they are. Culturally, historically, theologically, Egypt, to a first century Jew, stands for the enemy, ranking alongside Babylon as the classic symbol of threat and hostility. And yet, it's my favorite phrase, it is precisely into this place of deep and ominous otherness that the Lord calls the Holy Family. Rise, take the child and his mother and go into Egypt and remain there until I tell you. The Lord's command to Joseph defies convention, cutting hard against the grain of anything that would be expected of a devout Jewish family. So let's consider why this is. On the face of it, the flight of the Holy Family to Egypt is a response to Herod's tyranny. We just heard that read in the gospel reading. The king's response to the news of Christ's birth is to order the slaughter of the male children of Bethlehem. in the hopes that the one whom the Magi came to adore might be caught up in the massacre. As an aside, it is in honor of these children that today's Feast of the Holy Innocents gets its name. Now, though the violence of Herod may indeed have proven the spark for the Holy Family's flight, there's surely more going on here. The command to go to Egypt specifically is not coincidental. To escape the king's wrath, it would have made far more sense for Joseph to simply take his family back home to Nazareth in the north of the country, or go a little further north than that into the Gentile region of Tyre and Sidon, or even just across the River Jordan into the Greek cities of the Decapolis. And yet, they're called instead all the way to Egypt. And this is really important. In this journey of over 600 miles, the infant Christ retraces the steps of his people in the Exodus, but in the reverse, traveling from the Promised Land back into the wilderness, back through the Sinai Desert, back over the Red Sea, and into the land of Egypt. In this movement, the Lord begins symbolically in the place of blessing, the land of milk and honey promised to Abraham, and moves into the place of curse, the land of slavery and oppression from which his people need deliverance. Here we see in microcosm the movement of the incarnation. God's traveling, as it were, from the promised land of heaven into the hostile territory of a world gripped by sin in order to reconcile, redeem, and enfold. It is this pattern of God's saving work which we see imaged in the story, in the Lord's journey to, and indeed presence in, Egypt. Because let's not forget that his time there was not short. Remain there until I tell you, we heard the angel command Joseph. And in the verse just after today's gospel reading ends, Matthew records that the family only returned to Nazareth after Herod's death. Because of this, both historical accounts and church tradition place the Holy Family in Egypt for anywhere between 3 and 7 years. It's no exaggeration to say that Jesus was, at least in part, raised in Egypt. It's there that he probably learnt to walk. There that he began to eat solid food. There that he was taught to speak. And we must assume not only speak the Aramaic of his parents, but indeed the Coptic of his new Egyptian community. Here, remarkably, we see the land of Israel's ancient enemy, the land and people who exemplify the other, chosen as the place of Christ's childhood, the place within which God incarnate would find shelter and refuge and home, when, to quote the Gospel of John, his own would receive him not. By sending his son into Egypt, God reclaims and redefines that space, blessing it with the presence of the Messiah and transforming the land once associated with Israel's humiliation into the setting in which Israel's true deliverer is preserved. Long before Jesus' public ministry begins, he is at work, moving beyond ethnic and covenantal boundaries and into the space of the proverbial other, so that his saving work may not be clearly defined as a distinction between the us and the them. From the beginning of his earthly life, the Lord brings not only an other, but specifically the other which is enemy, into the fold of his eternal plan of redemption. Who surrounds him at his birth? Untrustworthy, disreputable shepherds. Crooks, all of them, No pun intended. Who were then called to worship from afar? Pagan sorcerers from Babylon. Where does he then go for refuge and community? The land of Egypt, the land of the enemy. From the beginning, the Christ who is Lord at his birth begins the work of sanctifying the other, welcoming and sending forth the shepherds as heralds of his coming, receiving the adoration of the Magi, crossing the desert and the Red Sea back into the land of the ancient oppressor, that these others may be enfolded into the work of salvation, reconciled to him, and numbered among his people. And this is exactly what he does for you and for me, all of us who were once other to God. The incarnation is God's movement into an adversarial space, movement into the realm of that which is other to him, in order that that other may be known as a space and people transformed, reconciled, and enfolded into an integral part of his story. Seen here is the God who takes the initiative and moves first into that place of otherness, moves into that Egypt, so that I may know it as a place where he is already present and at work, reconciling it to me and me to it, just as he first reconciled me to him. Because of this, the question I think I must ask myself, and the question with which I will leave you, is this. If God is indeed the one who moves into that Egypt, think this symbolic Egypt, this place of otherness, what is the Egypt, as it were, into which he is calling me, into which he's calling you? What is the Egypt, the place of otherness, seemingly of threat, or of hostility, or of fear, from which I might be running? What is the place, or situation, or circumstance I perceive to be hostile, threatening, frightening, or simply so other I can't imagine myself in it, but to which the Lord may be calling me? Perhaps this is a literal move house, city, state, country. Perhaps a more figurative one, a move into a new job, a move into no job, a move into marriage, a move into singleness, a future or a circumstance different to what I had imagined or expected, different to what you had thought for yourself. This place of otherness, this seemingly threatening other, is the place into which God has gone first, just as first he went into Egypt to sanctify, transform, and enfold into his plan. That the place of otherness may be reconciled to me and I to it. What is that Egypt into which God might be calling you?